Hi, everyone. I'm LaurieAnn. I am back out from Milton, Ontario, Canada, and I am with.
I am that guy. I am Roy Miller from Dallas, Texas, and we would like to welcome you to our Lift Your Story podcast.
On this episode, we're very pleased to have Adam Growe, and he is the Cash Cab, and we're going to find out more about this. And we're really pleased to have you here today. Thank you very much, Adam.
Yes, thank you, Adam.
I love that it's that gal and that guy, and I'm the Cash Cab guy. So it's like a perfect mix in there. And for those of you who are listening that are not from Canada or familiar with the Canadian version of Cash Cab, there is a version of Cash Cab. It's a franchise show or at least there has been in over 30 different countries around the world. So I'm the Canadian Cash Cab guy. There are other, so if I don't sound like your Cash Cab guy, don't worry, you're still in the right place.
Well, speaking of that, when LaurieAnn told me you were coming on, so I said, oh, here, Cash Cab, I want to watch this. I'm going like, well, this isn't the same guy. It's from New York City.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not universal. I mean, you are not universal in the States. You're in Canada.
Yes, and there was a time where the promise was no cash cabs from one country seeping into the borders and the audiences of other countries. But of course, in the global digital media market, that was very short-lived. So eventually people were very familiar with, especially in Canada, the American version. And Ben Bailey is an award-winning host and an extremely talented and funny guy. So I had big shoes to fill in terms of the audience, because the American version was in production for about 4 seasons before we even started in Canada.
Yeah, so somebody was doing it, you say, show me your passport first.
Yeah.
Right. You can't do it here. Go back.
Yeah, that's right. I did do one version of the American because Ben was unavailable for a special that they were recording, and I got a lot of flack from his fans in terms of, don't even bother coming back, buddy. It was all good though, all good.
That's funny.
So, beyond what you do now, I love the Cash Cab. I've probably watched almost every episode, but I also understand that you've moved into different areas. I've been sort of watching you on LinkedIn. What is it that you've been doing since this pandemic has occurred?
Well, I like to frame that first and foremost by saying I feel very fortunate during the COVID crisis that I've got my privilege and my experience to fall back on. So in the context of professionally, at least, freaking out in March of 2020 when all of my work completely disappeared. Obviously, as an entertainer and a comedian, I'm pitching shows. When I'm not in development or making a show, I'm pitching shows. I can't say that I had anything in development when COVID struck, but certainly the prospect of having any conversations about getting another television show were immediately shut down because there are other people who were in development or even making shows that were going to be shut down. So that prospect left. But even in advance of Cash Cab and other TV shows that I've worked on, my bread and butter has been live performing, whether it be at comedy clubs or theaters or mostly corporate events. That's been my main source of revenue, even in advance of Cash Cab. And all of the gigs that I had booked when COVID hit were completely canceled. And there was really no prospects of anything else. So I just immediately decided that I needed to find a way to create and be creative. So I went online, and social media platforms are not my strong point. They've never been my strong point in my career. So trying to connect with audiences via Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and YouTube was just, I have a very limited profile. Let's say I'm being very respectful of myself. It's weak is my profile on social media. So the prospect of connecting with fans and stuff was not something that I built. So, but I just thought, I'm going to start creating. And I immediately started doing Facebook events where it was trivia, my own branded trivia, the Adam Growe quiz show. And the first few shows were like a disaster. I was like, trying to live stream on Facebook Live, and the way I mounted my phone at the time, I was sideways live streaming the first stream. I could hear my family laughing through the air vents of my house because they were trying to support me, but at the same time, it was ridiculous. And so, but I persevered, right? And so to, in some respects, I wasn't doing something that was completely new for me, but I was reinventing myself to a certain degree, which was going into platforms. I'm a TV guy, I'm a live guy, I'm not a social media guy. And social media, you know, as you are, the two of you are learning and discovering and creating an audience for yourselves. And we're all from the same generation, if I may say so. It's you know, the kids like to laugh at us, the Gen Zers, even the millennials are like, you know, come on, give, you know, really give it up. But we try, and it was just important for me, not necessarily think that I'm going to be a huge influencer all of a sudden, but to be creative. And as a result of that, I did over 20 weeks of producing a show. And in the process of doing that, learned a lot about producing for digital media, discovered a lot of different platforms to use, and eventually started getting booked for gigs in the virtual online event landscape. And it morphed into the hybrid landscape and then quickly back into all online, as you are both aware, as the rolling lockdowns, as we are continuing, at least in Ontario right now, as of the making of this podcast, not to date this, if you're listening to this in the year 2034, you know, there was another lockdown in the province of Ontario in December of 2020. And so, but for me, like, to be honest with you, when the lockdown happened and all of my business went away, and I just, you know, did what everybody in business says, be agile, you know, reinvent yourself. I got my first paid gig in May after producing and just doing stuff. And it was for close to or less than what I had made early in my career 20 years ago. But it was like I just won the lottery. I was like online producing a virtual event, a quiz show for a corporate client, and they were paying me. I felt like I had just got my first job ever. And I think that people can probably relate to that. I mean, you might be, not you two, but you as a listener, if you're listening right now, you might not have had to make changes, or maybe you have and you haven't been able to get back to work. If you haven't felt that during this pandemic, you will. I'm optimistic for you, and you will get that first gig. You will get back into the workforce. You will be productive again, and you will feel that you are, if you're not even in the creative industries, you will feel it's happening, and it's a great feeling. And as a result of that, I've had one of the busiest seasons ever for the corporate event season, which is always busy, October, November, December. And I think it's busier now because people were like, you know, we had to shut down. We didn't have any opportunities, but at the same time, we want to do something for our staff, and we want to do something for our team, and we don't have to book a conference center or even a restaurant. We could decide, let's do something tomorrow. And so people were calling, can you do an event tomorrow? I was like, well, no, it takes a little bit of prep time. And you know, the two of you know, you've decided to produce this video podcast and put it into the podcast arena. And there's admin, there's business, there's administration involved. You don't just turn on a mic. There's a sense of that for the listener or the viewer. So for people who are like the three of us that are in the creative industry, in the entertainment or, you know, audio, visual or audio production, the most important thing is to just start doing it, and you'll start generating revenue. It's not like, I'm not being trite about do what you love and the money will follow, but if you're not creating, you're not going to be positioning yourself to get the gigs. And so I just instinctively knew. And so that's what I'm doing now. I look forward to getting back into live, but I'm now producing corporate events, full turnkey events with in my own online studio. I've got guests. I've had comedians, illusionists, painters come into my studio, and then I feed that production to a landing platform for a client, and they pick it up. So I'm producing online, and in fact, I'm now in production of like short web series, which arguably in advance of COVID, it's a very competitive market, but people start coming to you if you've got solutions. And so I'm producing shows in the cloud right now that you know, may or may not go away once things open up, but then I'll be ready to go back live on stage. So I just feel really, really fortunate. At the same time, I saw an opportunity and I busted my butt and had a lot of fun doing it. And you know, you're the last little bit of media I'm doing before like really shutting down for the holidays, but like I know what's going to happen. Someone's going to say just one New Year's Eve show, and then it'll be like, yes, of course. So
Well, it's funny you mentioned because I did a series about podcasting. It's like a research and a presentation for some people, right? And so LaurieAnn goes, I've always thought about that. So she said, well, we ought to do one. So we just said, well, okay, heck, let's do it, see what happens. So we just threw ourselves out there, and we did a couple of interviews with ourselves, and we just went from there. We just kept going. So it's growing, and we're learning. I think hopefully we're getting better. But like you say, you just got to go out there and do it. That's what we did.
Well, and yeah, and that's when you're self-produced, when you're creating something and you don't have this team of people, the first part on the learning curve for the two of you, if this is your first podcast, is what's the content. You have to start there, and you always have to be refining the content and being responsive to the feedback you get. But then there's the whole other element of it, especially in social media, unlike traditional or linear television or traditional terrestrial radio or even satellite radio, when you've got a broadcaster that's behind it. When you're self-producing something and trying to go into there are podcast networks that you can pitch your podcast to, and then they get behind you. But ultimately, in the digital media sector, to reach an audience, even if podcasting is a growth market and there's lots of opportunities for revenue through sponsorships, etc., it's tough to get traction. So that's the whole other learning curve, that you're going to have challenges and sweats, but a lot of fun learning. And so, I'm happy for you. I'm excited for you. I look forward to seeing where it goes.
Well, how does your platform work with like a corporate event, a virtual corporate event?
Well, the key with it is to, like, I'm in my home studio right now. Ultimately, I have some other satellite venues. In the last 9 months, I've only performed in a hybrid environment twice out of all the business I've had in 9 months. One was for Just for Laughs in Montreal. The big comedy festival typically it's the world-renowned international festival. They did a drive-in series at a manufactured drive-in venue in Montreal, and I was the host of that for 2 nights, 4 shows. And that was people in vehicles, so it wasn't like it was a hybrid. It's what they call hybrid, but it wasn't streaming anywhere. And then after that, I did a corporate event where I was in a studio, and it was a very small crew, everybody masked up and distanced, and we were producing in the studio, and then that was being streamed live to a platform where people were attending the event. And anytime I was interviewing a panel or introducing a keynote, they were also virtually on their computer somewhere else. The vast majority of my work is produced from my whatever square foot office in my home with green screen, where I can either, as I am a guest on your Zoom platform, I can be a guest on anybody else's platform. And there's dozens of them. There's more popping up. Pre-COVID, these platforms existed. And you've probably heard the conversations where people like, well, before COVID, we're always saying we should go digital. We should really make a transition, but it takes a lot of work, and it's going to take years, and it's going to take hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then COVID hit, and everybody's like, we got to do it now. And so it's like all of a sudden these platforms happen. So I can be a guest and perform or present a keynote or do stand-up comedy. The vast majority of my business, I do a keynote presentation, I do stand-up comedy, but the vast majority, about 90% of it, is my quiz show, where I'm performing and I'm doing interactive trivia with people on screen as dozens or hundreds. I've done events where there's thousands of people attending across the country, and I might only have like a half dozen people on the screen with me. And eventually I got to the point where I was augmenting those experiences with an interactive app. So people are watching on the platform, and then I've got my own custom app where they log in. Like if you're watching on your laptop or your desktop, you can play my questions on your mobile phone at the same time for points and a leaderboard and prizes and teams and everything like that. So the engagement in the virtual landscape or the online landscape, which is more traditionally used these days, because virtual just sounds like you're in a VR a goggle headset, something like that. So in the online landscape, wherever it is, I can augment the experience with interactive gameplay. But a lot of my work, I use a platform called StreamYard. I recommend it to you if you ever get into, if you haven't tried it. You can't have a lot of guests there, but you can either produce in the cloud, download and edit and have a finished product that you edit, like a web series that I've done. And I'm into another 6 episodes of another web series that I'm producing in the cloud. It's not live streaming anywhere. I produce it, record it, edit it, and then ship it out. But I can also produce with guests in StreamYard, and you can do this in other platforms too. But StreamYard is the one that I'm using right now, and they're not a sponsor. Don't worry, this is not a free plug or anything like that. But from my virtual studio in the cloud, I can stream that live to other platforms. So that's the benefit, and it's a little bit more in real-time production. I'm like, what was that guy? I don't know if you are. Maybe you not Roy, maybe not you, Roy, but LaurieAnn, you might remember SCTV, the comedy show. You probably got SCTV down there, Roy, right?
Yeah, we
the
did,
Canadian. So there was a character that Rick Moranis played called, I think he was Gary Todd. He was like, Gary Todd here in the production studio. And he had that radio voice on the TV. And I kind of like, I feel like that guy because he was kind of live producing. He was doing live mixing on TV. And he was like, let's throw it to this one. It was like just a hysterical character. I feel like that because I'm producing in a live stream, I'm producing real time. I can change the cameras. I can bring in bigger screens. I've got graphics, overlays, logos, everything. It's just a more fun production savvy platform. And so, when people say, we really want to do an event, but we don't know we don't even know what platform. It's like, I have a solution for you. I can do the whole thing myself. They're like, done. Like that's, that might not be my competitive advantage in 3 or 4 months as more and more people get more tech savvy. But now in a company that I've had previous clients where I've been, like clients that have hired me to host a conference, a beach destination rewards for their company. They're familiar with me and they kind of like send me, it's like, well, I guess that's not happening this year, but do you do anything online? I'm like, actually, I do. And they're like, wow, let's do it. Boom. And so that's where I'm living right now in the professional arena of Adam Growe and the Cash Cab guy. But listen, I have the brand. That's why I started the conversation. I have the brand of being the Cash Cab guy in Canada. It's not like I haven't been hired for events just as a host. Sometimes I'm just hired to host things. And that's what I was doing before Cash Cab. And they just want a professional to go keep the energy up and keep the things moving. Certainly getting that booking, but heading into this pandemic, I had the benefit of a brand that people were very familiar with. And then you're going to find this as you get more and more listeners for your show. There are going to be people that are going to listen to your Lift Your Story podcast 18 months after you produced it. And they go, I just discovered it. I really listened to that episode and it was just amazing what you did. And you're like, you just never know. In the pandemic, Cash Cab went like marathons on TV, on traditional television. Cash Cab's not available very much on the OTTs, the over the top networks, the Netflix and whatever, but some stuff is being shared on YouTube a little bit. But because of the pandemic, people were just watching everything, and Cash Cab got into marathons on the weekend, and I had a whole new round. We have 8 seasons of that show in Canada that are in rotation now. And so there were whole new fans coming in. I just discovered Cash Cab and it was already a hit like 4 or 5 years ago. And all of a sudden I had that momentum. So, I'm very fortunate with that, with having that into the pandemic and being able to create and sell based on that.
Well,
what I really like about, sorry, Roy, but what I really love about the Cash Cab is it's not just entertaining, but it's also because there's questions being asked and you participate at home, but you're learning as well. So that's what I like about it. It's not just
because LaurieAnn tell me, she goes, I was watching Cash Cab, and she said, I try to answer the questions. And she said there was one something about copper, and I said, was the answer CU? She goes, yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's in the television world. It's not quite as big a factor in the podcasting world, but in the television world, they call it co-viewing. So you watch a show. I mean, certainly in the pandemic, if you were fortunate enough to have family in your bubble, and I hope that you were, I was. My mom, who's 81 now, not so much. She was alone, so I take her to the theater every day. We've been watching for 9 months, almost like I think we've missed less than a half dozen. We watch something together, just to keep connected. But it's still a co-viewing of sorts. And so Cash Cab is great that way because it's not very specific genre. and multi-generations can watch it. And so, when you, LaurieAnn, are watching, even though you weren't at the time watching with Roy, you might not have the answer, but you're like, oh, I had no idea that you knew the answer to that. Like, you're learning something about the people you're watching with as well. And so that's the vibe of a show like that, is that it happened for the contestants in the Cash Cab, and it also happens for the people who are watching it together. And if you were watching by yourself and you had the same great experience, great. But it's billed as co-viewing, which is a big deal in television. To have that opportunity to have, especially multiple generations watching the same program, is rare.
True. Very much so. I did have one more question. I'm trying to remember what it is now. I just got into that co-viewing thing.
Well,
So from here too, that you also, I mean, part of the reason we're talking about this, and we're not going to take a long time about this, but you do help with foundations. I know that we're talking about gender equality and such, and I think that that's a great thing, that you're out there helping. And also, I know that you're doing a lot for comedians. And we did have Mark Breslin on. I've known Mark Breslin since a long time. And that's where I'm shifting now, sorry. But he did say that they did a drive-in and it didn't have that same effect because of that non-connection. How did that, I mean, the big one in Montreal, how did that work? Just for laughs.
Well, I think part of what helped with the Montreal event, it was, anytime you do a drive-in, you should probably do it in the spring or summer. I know that there were some drive-ins happening in the fall, and it might have been a little bit more difficult. In Montreal, I mean, everywhere in the world, one of the biggest challenges that we've had in shutting this pandemic down has been inconsistencies in terms of what's permitted and what's not. And I'm not throwing any shade on the differences that allow the Montreal to work, but in Quebec, the rules were you could come and park within your spot, but you could sit outside the vehicle. You could sit in front of it. Or if you had a pickup truck, you could sit on top of it. Whereas in Ontario, and I believe in other provinces across the country, you, in a drive-in environment, you had to stay in the car. I've certainly heard of drive environments where people were in the car, that it was still successful. I put that mostly on not the rules or the government or the organizers, the festival bookers. I put that on us as the comedians. It's our job to make sure that we deliver. And so the advice, I was the first person in Montreal to go up on stage. And my advice to the other acts after that was trust your material, right? You're not, as a comedian, going to get the same feedback that you're used to, regardless of whether the people are sitting in front of their car or in their car or honking or whatever, in an intimate comedy club environment or in the big St. Denis Theater for Just for Laughs when there's over 2,000 people here watching the show. You're not going to get that same vibe, but you're still funny. And people, aren't going to have the same energy to play off of when they're in a large crowd together. But people have come there to laugh. So the intent is there. They're on your side, right? And so you just have to trust your material and let your jokes breathe before you move on to the next one and not panic. But even in the most optimal environments, comedians on stage, I mean, it's a very challenging career. I've suffered this exact challenge where you get up and it's not going the way you want. And all of a sudden it's just like, oh my God, where is this going to go? And you have a horrible set. Doesn't happen very often, but even to the best of us. And so when you're not getting any immediate feedback, I don't know what Yuck's experience was, but it might have been that maybe some of the acts just weren't ready for that kind of an adjustment, or maybe they just didn't have the number of vehicles or whatever. There's so many factors. Yucks is one of the top brands of comedy in the world too. So I hope they try again, because we're going to need it. We're going to need Yucks comics to get back on that horse and trust their material. There's different brands. Just for Laughs comedy is very different than comedy that you might go to get at Yucks. And so, Breslin would be the first to agree with me that Yucks is a little bit more risque. It's even blue. It's even dark. It's meant to be that. That's the brand that he has created successfully for decades and what people go to. So when you go to a car in a parking lot and you're getting kind of that edgy material, maybe it doesn't resonate. It's possible. whereas more accessible stuff, and you don't know who's coming in that car. In a club environment, you can, like I always say to the corporate gig, like I started in stand up with the intent 100% to do corporate gigs. I knew that that's where I was going to make my money, and this is almost 30 years ago, and I did the club scene, but I wasn't a dark or edgy comic. I did it with the intent of developing material to go to the corporate gigs. And I always say to people, don't think of corporate gigs as being, selling out, because the same people that are attending a corporate gig appreciate your sensibilities and your sense of humor. If you took those same people from a black tie event where you're hosting a gala and you've got to do TV clean material, you could take everybody to a comedy club and they get into that vibe, and then you could go all sorts of different places because it's a different atmosphere. And so don't undersell the challenges of both environments and being creative in both. You need to be successful in both. And add to that, that's what we're talking to. Add to that, as you as an artist, as a comedy artist, you have to be able to achieve success in a hybrid environment, like a drive-in. That's the new normal. It's going to be important for at least another year that you can perform on those environments, perhaps even longer, hopefully not, knock on wood. But this spring and summer and fall, drive-ins are going to be popping. If you have a couple successful shows, you're going to get booked, right? And I think that that's portable to other environments. Like I do leadership communications coaching with executives. I'm a first aid instructor. I'm certified with the Canadian Red Cross. And so people are teaching virtually now, trying to communicate, trying to inspire, trying to persuade people on television. I'm a TV person. I can help you. You need to now, if you were great at a town hall as an executive, and you could really inspire the troops, or you could lead a small meeting, you now need to be good at that on television, because this is TV right now. The podcast is being videotaped. You need to be persuasive and inspirational. It's your job. Don't, people were, taking shots at the virtual online world, say, it's not the same. It's like, well, it's the reality right now. I suggest you get good at it for as long as it's there. And hopefully you'll go back to the normal way of being successful, and you just have that other asset in your back pocket.
Was it hard to get your first corporate job?
Well, it was through a client that had worked with me before. It was a division of a client that knew me. So it wasn't a complete cold call, and that helps. Like in anything in business, relationships are there.
Exactly.
They hadn't personally worked with me before, but someone else within the company said, he's a great guy, he's going to be able to do it. And I don't mind telling you that one was a bit of a disaster too, because it was like I was working with the technology for the first time, and the platform was just not conducive to performing with people interacting with me. And the learning curve that you're going to find perhaps with this podcast is the questions I'm asking now in my studio, or the platform that I'm feeding to, or the gamification app. Does your company have any firewalls that prevent your people from accessing this content? So that was the first lesson, was people couldn't get on the show. And I was live with a handful of them, but we were waiting for other people, and the company's firewalls were blocking the platform because, you remember early in the pandemic, there were all sorts of stories of photobombing or jumping in, and people weren't setting up with passwords. Like as a comedian, that stuff is hilarious to me. Now that stuff got quickly course corrected, but at the same time, companies were rightfully so nervous. So they created firewalls. So I booked this gig and people were joining, and there was probably about 24, under 50 people that were trying to get on. And it was just this constant buffering of people disconnecting or texting, and, very difficult to perform when you're also tech managing and trying to get people connected, and then realizing that some of these people are not going to make it because they weren't at home, or they were using their office device, and there was still that firewall. So that's another thing that we just have to be aware of, and like I'm doing tech rehearsals before everything, get a couple people from their company to jump on board to make sure that everything works, which you do. Like, honestly, at this point in my career, when I'm actually doing a club gig or a corporate gig in a conference center or a theater venue, the sound check is like test 1, 2, okay, we're done. Like that's it. Now I'm back to the days where it's like, you got to roll through like all sorts of tech stuff. You got to make sure everything's working. And listen, when I'm producing something in the cloud and the client's relying on me to live stream all of the performers from my studio, because those other performers don't have the same tech savvy or setup that I do, I'm now a producer of the show. If I have a power outage, whoa, the pressure is it's a totally different animal to me. So I gotta up my, my fee, just something there to take on the liabilities. But I've always had that, the two of you are producing this as well as hosting it. There's a rush you get from producing great content. When you got Breslin to be a guest, right? You must have had that, satisfaction. Yes, there. And then when you edit this one and you put it out there, you're proud. It's your baby. I mean, you got to have that sense of pride, and especially in the digital social platform world, you're producing your own content. You got to be excited about all aspects of it and really get into it. And so, if it becomes a burden and you don't like doing it, it's going to be tough to push out new content and get traction.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's definitely best to have some contingency plans in operation.
Yeah.
Because, especially with technology, because you never know. It's great when it works, but when it doesn't, it's brutal.
And you just got to roll with it, though. I mean, there's so many. I've been to webinars with high-end people, and they're sitting there and they can't get their thing to work. You just say, well, you know what? I think we've become a lot more patient with it, though, with this, being the fact that we're on it so often. We understand so many people are streaming out there too. And
yeah, I wonder about that, LaurieAnn, because I actually posted about that a few weeks ago, and fortunately people were very forgiving. As I was learning on the fly. I was creating content for paid gigs, learning on the fly, which is not necessarily the best practice, but everybody's like, we're kind of in the same boat, Adam. So it's okay if there's glitches. There's going to come, there are some really impressive online platforms for online events. And one of the things I've noticed for myself is that I'm attending and consuming much more content. Oh, I apologize.
Yep. I think we all are.
I'm consuming a lot more, because when I get hired to host or perform at a conference, I might be there on site for 3 days, and they might say, you're welcome to attend whatever you want, but I usually don't, because I like to be a fly on the wall unless I'm in the spotlight. I don't want to, sometimes I will, like if it's a really interesting keynote or whatever, but for the most part I don't. And certainly not big events that would cost $3,000 for a ticket. Plus I got to fly myself there and put myself up, unless my company's paying for that. But I've gone to, and I've got more booked and been consuming a lot more content. And these platforms existed pre-COVID, and now people are becoming savvy. So I wonder, LaurieAnn, if there's going to be a time where people are like, this is unsatisfactory. It took you 15 seconds to get your slides working. You're done. It's like, what? Just give me a second. I got it. Just calm down. But because people are going to be
the patience will go away, because it's just like anything, right? I remember I started technology in 1984, so don't go there with me. The baud rate and it's waiting for the phone to go. But now if it's not like this, we've just turned into that kind of generation. And as we grow older, the scary thing is, even if the young people we say, oh, they're like that, so are we.
Yeah. Well, and we're kind of, on the learning curve. It's been a little easier for millennials and Gen Zers, but at the same time for Gen X and boomers, especially during the pandemic, we've had to quickly adapt. And my mom, who I had to help her the first time, she's now shopping for groceries online, and she's able to navigate different platforms to consume content. That would have never happened unless we had to urgently learn. And so I'm grateful for the technology and the fact that, in Canada, first world country, that there are people, I don't know that I've gone to the point where I'm 100% like it's a human right to have high-speed internet. I think there's a certain aspect that it's a luxury, but everybody, it certainly has brought out the inequities across the country. There are communities in Canada, primarily Indigenous communities, that don't even have, forget broadband or high-speed internet, drinking water, clean drinking water. And you think about the inequities that are, brought out when a crisis happens, and how quickly things can be resolved. In some regards, you kind of look back a little embarrassed that your own country hasn't been addressing some of these other crucial things. And you hope now that the lesson learned is that, we can achieve great things if we put the budgets to it and we put the accessibility. But when you think about even the luxury being able to enjoy something and be distracted. I mean, as a comedian, you do look at the dark side of the comic when there's resistors, people who don't want to comply with the mask or distancing, and they think it's a conspiracy, and it's their liberties are being infringed. Even in Canada, I mean, I know, Roy, you probably had to deal with that a little bit more in the
Oh, yeah.
rhetoric in the States than we did, but even in Canada, this exists, and it's kind of funny to think about. Really, the hardest thing that you've ever had to experience in your life is you have to be a shut-in and watch and binge watch shows on Netflix. I mean, this is the ultimate privilege. And now I know for some people, they aren't like me. They don't look and sound like me, and they didn't have the privilege and the benefit that I had going in. And they did have food and shelter insecurity during the pandemic. I did not. So I'm careful when I joke a lot. But at the end of the day, the large urban population in Canada, for sure, this was not tough to achieve. And when you look at rural and remote regions, to not have that simple luxury of being able to connect, like think about me going to the theater every day. We called it the theater. We're watching a show together online. And I've had, it started out 5 days a week, and it's been 3 times a week with my 81-year-old dad and 87-year-old stepmom in Vancouver and our family around North America. Zoom meetings. Think about not even having that to connect over the last 9 months. It's devastating to think about that.
Yeah, I often said that I'm so happy this didn't happen in the 1980s. I mean, we're very lucky that it happened in the 2020s. As much as it's not a good thing to happen, but it's going to happen. This was a time in life that makes no sense.
Oh, it would have been 100 times worse back before the internet and all that. I mean, it would have been blood in the streets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Literally.
Yeah. But like you, Adam, my mother is 85, my dad's 88, and he had 3 strokes about 4 years ago. So my mom took over his iPhone. Yeah, she creeps me all the time, and she sends me messages all the time. I'm going, worst thing ever. I love her, Mom. I love you, but seriously,
Yeah.
it's funny. I mean, and she told me I could never do technology. I'm going, oh yes, anyone can. If you have the desire, you can do it.
What have we created, Mom? What have we, yeah.
Well, that's like me. I used to have a flip phone, and I was, I just want to answer the phone and get voicemail. I don't need all this other stuff, So finally, they didn't make anything. You had to upgrade to like a smartphone. So, and my kids always give me, oh, Dad, God, kill me, So now then they always go, Dad, get your head out of the phone. Pay attention.
Yeah, we're all there on various screens. One of the good things that my wife did for us was we started getting a print newspaper again, which we hadn't had in a long time, just a couple times a week. And just to get, like, I don't have a problem reading the news. I have subscriptions on my phone or on my computer, but it's just nice to not have screen time for a bit, right? So to open up a paper was like, okay, that's a good way to give your eyes a bit of a break from the glare.
Yeah.
I love newspapers. I'm sadly to say that our local one seems to have gone down since the pandemic, and there was a few ones, and I loved it. I mean, I know it's just local news, like some of it's pretty funny, but I just loved it. And now, yeah, we're not getting them anymore. So I agree with you. I think getting a newspaper, your wife's very smart with that. It's nice to hold something and move it like books. Yeah. So really appreciate your time. This has been just lovely. Learned a lot, and just very honored to have you on here. Thank you.
Yes.
My pleasure.
How can our listeners reach out to you, Adam?
Well, I'm wary to say to go to adamgrowe.com because I'm trying to update my website, but it's been slow because we need to do some stuff in person. And with the shutdowns, I haven't been able to do photo shoots or any other video production, but you can find me at adamgrowe.com. And I'm primarily using for my social media platforms, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. So you'll be able to easily search me there. And really trying to focus the content in those platforms. And I'll be able to communicate some of the stuff that we're launching in the new year with regards to some of the limited run web series that I'm working on. And LaurieAnn, you kind of joked with me and communicating with me about, we'll donate to this. And, because one of the things I'm doing with some of my social media is when, I don't know if you've heard of the site Cameo. It's pretty funny. I'm working with a Canadian platform called Onviva, which is Canadian owned, and it's an opportunity for musicians and comedians and chefs to be in control of the distribution of their own content, set their own price. So that's on viva.live or comedians.live. So they're not a sponsor of me or anything like that, but I'm trying to promote different ways for artists to be a little bit more in control of their content. So I looked at this other thing called Cameo, which is an American or an international thing, and you can actually book me on Cameo to send you a little video, and there's a price tag, and it ranges from like $1,500 for certain celebrities. I'm only like $50 or whatever like that. But I was like, this is kind of, it's a very Canadian thing to be humble about these things. Like, who's going to want to book me, to have a message sent to them, but people are. And so I just said, I'm making a donation on behalf of any money I'm generating from that. It would take me thousands to make what I make in the corporate world. So I'm not trying to make revenue there. So I'm just trying to engage people from a social standpoint. And so that's what LaurieAnn was saying, we can make a donation. Like I saw that's kind of what you're doing. So I have my tried and true kind of environmental based climate action charities or emergency relief charities to help people around the world, or a number of different charities that are helping with gender, racial, and economic inequities and oppression. And so people have been really interested in that. They're really keen to get a message, and they go, well, and so if I could pick one, I see that you're a foster parent with your wife, you foster babies. Would you make a donation? And I will make a separate one to the Children's Aid Society. And I said, absolutely. And I just think it's a wonderful way to have people connect with somebody that they have a little bit of fandom for. I love that. And, I'm very grateful for any fans that reach out to me at Cash Cab, but then to also do something that's community giving together, I think is a really beautiful way to connect with people.
That's outstanding. Really
Thank you.
is.
All right. Once again, thank you so much for being here, Adam, and really enjoyed the time here.
Yes, it was a pleasure to meet you.
You as well, and best of luck. And I'll leave you with one of my tried and true trivia questions, because people always are like, Cash Cab guy, you can't leave the show without a trivia question. And this is one of my go-to for my Adam Growe quiz show. InStyle magazine once called them the sexiest couple alive. Who are they, and what is the cutesy nickname of the super couple who are now divorced?
I would think it'd probably be Jennifer Aniston and Brad. What's his name?
Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt.
Oh, Brad Pitt and
Or are we looking past?
Jennifer Aniston.
Go on with this one.
Yeah, that's who I would have picked.
Is it Hollywood's Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, Brangelina? Or is it former US President Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, Barama Lama? Or is it the Hangover's Zach Galifianakis in a love triangle with Rihanna and Lady Gaga, Galifianakis Gagafianakis? Or is it boy band member Nick Carter and Britain's Got Talent star Susan Boyle, Backstreet Boyles? See, on the Adam Growe quiz show, you always get the funny multiple choice to lead you to the correct answer. So I hope you do get the correct answer based on those options, Roy.
You know what? We will post it for anyone listening.
If they still don't know the correct answer after that, well, obviously they've been consuming too much content in the last 9 months. Their brains are mush.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Adam. We appreciate
Cheers,
it.
team. Best of success.
All right.
Send me the links and I'll repost for you.
All right.
Absolutely. Thank you
Appreciate
so
it.
much.